Bueno, buenas tardes a todos y todas, bienvenidos. Si les parece, podemos iniciar esta webinar de la participación de las y los consumidores en los sistemas de alertas de productos inseguros. Para empezar, algunas consideraciones generales. Vamos a contar con 3 oradores. Cada uno de ellos va a realizar una presentación de aproximadamente 15 minutos y al final tendremos disponible unos 10 minutitos para preguntas y respuestas. Por otro lado, durante la reunión vamos a contar con interpretación, así que para aquellos que la necesiten, pueden activarla haciendo clic en el botoncito del Zoom y seleccionar la opción que corresponda al inglés o al español.
Excuse me, Paula, do you want me to just say it in English to make sure that everyone gets it?
Ok, perfecto.
So there's interpretation in English. Thanks to everyone for joining today. I see we have a few people joining from the Caribbean. And I just wanted to point out that interpretation is available for English speakers as well. So if you click on the more, the 3 dots at the bottom of the screen, you would see that there's interpretation in the drop-down menu, and then click on that and you could choose English and follow the event that way. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Mariette. Entonces, como les decía, quería darles la bienvenida desde la presidencia. Muchas gracias a todos y todas por conectarse a esta reunión. Como se ha planteado durante la última reunión plenaria, consideramos que es muy importante que discutamos y consideremos la implementación de ciertos mecanismos que permitan a los consumidores hacer sus denuncias respecto a y a las asociaciones también que los agrupan, hacer las denuncias sobre los productos inseguros dentro de estos sistemas que tenemos a nivel interno y también a nivel regional. No quiero tomar demasiado tiempo para la apertura porque estamos medio justos con el horario para este evento, así que voy a pasar a presentar a la primera oradora, Sara Khan, en representación de la CPSC de Estados Unidos, así que Sara, si estás disponible, ya te paso la palabra. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Paula. I will share my screen. Can you see this?
Yes, perfecto.
Hola a todos y todas y buenas tardes.
Hi, everyone, and good afternoon.
PSC de los Estados Unidos. Es un placer compartir
It's a
nuestras experiencias
pleasure
con
to
ustedes.
share this
Hoy
experience with
quisiera
you.
poner especial foco en la
I
participación de
would
los
like to
consumidores en
focus on
esta
the
sistema.
participation of
Sorry,
consumers.
I think I'm having some issues with the...
No, it's because we're both sharing the same English channel, so that's why you're listening to me. But right now that you go back to English, I will go back to Spanish and it'll be okay.
Okay. I will continue in English.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right. So today I'm sharing about saferproducts.gov, which is where incident reports from consumers to CPSC are received and where the public can file and read complaints about thousands of types of consumer products. Incident reports from consumers to CPSC are received through saferproducts.gov. This website was created as a result of the Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act, which mandated CPSC to establish and maintain a publicly available, searchable database on the safety of consumer products. You'll see this website has 3 important functions. The first is that the consumers can submit reports of harm or a risk of harm relating to the use of consumer products. They can also search for published incident reports and recalls to find out whether any products in their home or products they may be thinking of purchasing could pose a risk. The third function of saferproducts.gov has to do with businesses This is the business portal that I will not go over today because that is not our main focus. But for time's sake, I'll take any questions if you have any at the end. First, not all submitted reports by consumers are eligible to be posted on saferproducts.gov. Only reports that meet these following 8 criteria can be published. So a report must have a description of a consumer product, identification of the business so that CPSC can contact and notify the business before publication as required, description of the harm or potential harm, the date or the approximate date of the incident or when the user first became aware of the potential for a product to act in an unsafe manner, and the category of the user of the report. And this is to identify the user as a consumer, someone from a government agency, a medical professional, etc. And at a later slide, I will go over the full list of user categories available on the website. A report also needs contact information of the user. Consumers can submit anonymously, but by law, we cannot post or publish these anonymous reports on the website. And finally, the user must verify the accuracy of the report and give CPSC consent to publish the report. There may be other reasons that a report may be deemed unpublishable by CPSC. For example, reports that do not describe an illness, injury, or death, or a risk of illness, injury, or death cannot be published. So this includes reports focused solely on the cost or the quality of a consumer product. And this is because the purpose of incident reporting on this website is to gather information only related to unsafe products. Again, reports submitted anonymously or do not contain the user's full contact information cannot be published. And although reports can be submitted anonymously on the website, once consumers leave that blank, the website discourages them with a very strong pop-up message encouraging them, because then if they include their contact information, the report can be included in our database for the benefit of other consumers. We also screen out some reports for other miscellaneous reasons. One example of an unpublishable report is if it were submitted by a minor. But that being said, reports that are not published are still reviewed by staff and saved in our system for internal use when appropriate. There are some information that are removed from a report by CPSC before publishing. We never post or publish the name or any identifying information of the consumer, and this is also true for any identifying information for a victim or a potential victim named in the report, and that includes not only names, but any photographs or video evidence of the victim or any medical records. Additionally, information determined to be confidential to the business or materially inaccurate are removed. We also have the discretion to remove other information from reports that are irrelevant to product safety, or if a report describes a product outside of our jurisdiction. Here we can see some data on the number of reports and some information on users. In the fiscal years 2020 to 2022, we received over 21-something thousand reports on saferproducts.gov. And out of that 21-something thousand reports, 11,039 were actually published. If we look at the table on the right-hand side here, this is fairly consistent for each year. Around half of submitted reports were published. And I can give a bit of context on this. In fiscal year 2021, the 3 main reasons reports were not published were users did not attest to the report's accuracy, they did not consent to publishing, or they did not provide enough or any contact information. Only about 14% of these reports that were not published failed to meet the requirements for stating a product safety hazard or a potential risk of harm. So from this percentage, we know that a majority of the unpublishable reports were in fact relevant to product safety and could have been beneficial to consumers. Now, looking at the list on the left side here, an overwhelming majority of the published reports were submitted by consumers, 10,000 out of the 11,000. The rest were submitted by users of other categories. That includes public safety entities, government agencies, healthcare professionals, childcare or service providers, and medical examiners. And I mentioned public safety entities. That as a user category includes consumer associations or organizations and other civil society or nonprofit organizations that have a general public safety purpose. And this category also includes departments like local or state police, ambulance, or fire departments. We rely on this data and information for a variety of purposes. We are a data-driven agency, and every report that we receive is important as we conduct additional analysis and product investigations where appropriate. We use this data and information to conduct in-depth investigations, to identify patterns of unsafe products, to conduct recalls, and to develop outreach to consumers. Reports could also provide information that may contribute to our decision to seek penalties against any business, to create new safety regulations, or take any other action authorized by law. And please note that we do not have a mediator role between consumers and businesses, although a tool like this could very well be used for those agencies that do have that mandate. Now I will share with you the process of what happens once we receive a consumer report. So once a report is submitted to CPSC, staff enters the product and hazard codes into our database for further analysis. Then we clean up the report by redacting any of the unpublishable information that I went over previously. And once a report has been submitted, we have up to 5 business days to complete these 2 steps and to notify the business that is named in the report. Now, if the report does meet the criteria for publication, it is published online 10 business days after CPSC notifies the business. So during this 10 business day period, the business can take time to review the consumer's report and determine whether it wants to make a public comment or submit to us a request to leave certain pieces of information out of the published report. If a business makes a claim that the report contains confidential or materially inaccurate information, the CPSC will conduct a general review of that claim. We nearly always favor correction of information or the addition of information to correct a already published report over excluding or taking down entire reports from saferproducts.gov. I should mention here that the submission of a claim of materially inaccurate information is a relatively rare event. In the previous fiscal year, 2022, we received 8 businesses that submitted claims of materially inaccurate information. This is similar for claims of confidential information. In the previous fiscal year, there were 5 businesses that submitted claims of confidential information. So not very, very common. Now, this is an example of a report that was submitted by a consumer, and we have a business comment below that. So in this report, the consumer details an incident in which their baby crib rail split and the baby could have potentially been injured. We published a business's comment, which says that they have been in contact with the consumer. They advised them that any modifications to the crib that the consumer made themselves is unsafe. And they said they are working to help the consumer to expedite free replacement parts for the crib, and that they have investigated the data for this particular crib model and don't see any similar incidents. I think this is a good example of how published consumer reports and comments from the firm or the company can be used by both consumers and industry to address product safety hazards. And in this case, the inclusion of this particular, this particular report and comment in the website can serve as an educational reminder to all stakeholders that making modifications to a baby's crib can be very hazardous. Before I move on from the slide, I want to note that there is no limit on the number of comments that a business may submit. That being said, we don't publish any back and forth between the consumer and the business unless someone says something particularly important that affects the original case. This helps to filter out any irrelevant comments or details, and it helps to keep the focus on product safety. Now I'll share some of the searching and database function of the website. Anyone can search for published reports and recalls, and they can download the search results, or the database is updated daily and anyone can search that database for specific product hazards or categories, or they can just download the entire file. We have a clearinghouse database, which includes incident reports from the public, not only received from saferproducts.gov, but also by email, by calls to our hotline number, and by postal mail. So this database is a lot more comprehensive and is also available to be downloaded at this link right here. And that is the end of my presentation here today. This is my email address. I would be happy to connect with you and answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Sara.
Thank you,
Súper clara la
Sarah.
presentación. Te agradezco
Very
que
clear
compartas esta
presentation.
información
Thank
tan
you for
importante para
sharing
nosotros
this very
para
important
justamente
information
implementar
to
esta
us
participación de los
to
consumidores a nivel
precisely
interno y
implement the
también dentro del
participation
CIAC.
of consumers internally
Algunas de las
within
cosas que me
CR.
pareció también
Some
muy
of the things
interesante es
that
esto
I
de poder
think
ver
were very interesting
algunas de las
is
cifras
to
que nos
see some of the
muestran un
figures
poco
that
sobre el
show
impacto de esta
the
participación en los
impact
sistemas
of this participation in
de
the
alertas y de difusión de información.
alert system and
Vamos
discussion of
a
information.
dejar las preguntas para el
We're
final,
going to leave the
así
questions
que ahora
for the
voy
very
a pasar
end. So
al
let me go
siguiente
now
expositor, que es
to
el
our
señor
next
Juan Pablo
speaker,
López, en
Juan
representación
Pablo
de la
López,
Superintendencia
that
de Industria y Comercio
represents
de
the
Colombia.
Superintendency of
Adelante,
Industry
Juan Pablo.
and Trade in Colombia. Juan Pablo, let me share my screen. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to share this space with you. My name is Juan Pablo Lopez, and I'm the current Director of Investigation of Consumer Protection. Before beginning, let me how the organizational chart of the superintendency works that surveils the interest and compliance of consumer rights in the country. In principle, we have the superintendent of industry and trade, who in turn has a delegate that in every sanction decision seek for the protection of the consumer. The superintendent of consumer protection has a director who is me, who is the first level in every admin sanction for the protection of consumer in the special regime we're under based on law 1480 of 2011. This includes some issues such as guarantees, information, advertising, and the topics that have us here today, which is issues related to product safety. I would also like to say that in Colombia, we have an opaque control in consumer protection, as I will show you later, where we can see, for example, that in health matters, the competence is assumed by another entity, which is IBIMA, which in some cases has reduced the potential of consumer protection, but with the presentation that I hope I can share with you, we'll be able to show you how we can generate more integral protection, even though when their authorities have consumer protection, but we also integrate other important players, which is civil society, based on consumer protection associations. So in principle, let me show the regulatory body that frames my presentation. Act 1480 from 2011, which is the consumer law. And I would like to talk about Article 3 that talks about the right to participation, and that it very explicitly says consumers will have the right of organize themselves to protect their rights and interests. However, oftentimes, and I feel it's the reason why we're here today, how do they do to ask for this compliance to the rights, mostly in terms of permanent supervision exercise? And the answer is very clear, and it's through a project that's called the National Consumer Network Protection, that which is what I'll be talking about. The Consumer Protection National Network is based on this Act 1480, Article 75, whose purpose is one, to articulate all of the authorities that have consumer protection headed by the Superintendency of Industry and Trade and other authorities such as the Superintendency of Health in vivo, the Financial Superintendency, the Solidarity Superintendency, among other national authorities whose purpose is to protect consumer depending on each one of their areas. However, it also has two important players to underscore. First, territorial authorities, mayor's office, because they also have roles in protecting consumers with some limitations. And as I mentioned before, the most important thing for this presentation, it also integrates consumer protection associations. A short introduction to the Consumer Protection Network. It's an instrument created by Act 1480 to disseminate and support compliance of consumer rights in all of the regions in the country, in particular the initiatives of efforts of its members in issues related to consumption of goods and services. Let me mention why I wanted to integrate this to the exercise that I'm doing as director of research in consumer protection. Before being in this position, I had the chance to work for almost 3 years in the Consumer Protection Network, and I had the chance to travel all around the country and have permanent conversations with associations, and understanding that they're the ones that really feed us as Superintendency of Industry and Trade, and very specific issues on eventual breaches to consumer rights, where we find a large number of situations related to product safety. And we find in these exercises that is developed by the network is a regionalization of consumer protection, understanding that we want to decentralize consumer protection, not only in the urban areas, but also in the rural as well, so that it can feed what I'm doing right now as director of the information being collected in this project in order to develop the research where we have the competencies to sanction for up to 2,000 minimum salaries in effect in Colombia, as well as to issue orders that are preventive and reactive to mitigate the risks that may be caused by the undue application of the standards for consumer protection. As far as the members is concerned for this network, we have the financial superintendency in charge of financial consumers, the one on transportation. So it's transportation services, air and land. We also have super health in terms of users and health services in VIMA. We also have air associations as well. And like I mentioned, the consumer protection associations grouped as consumer organizations. I would like to mention here to explain that in regards to the regulation that comes up in regards to bills and consumer protection, the consumer statute says that there always has to be complete dialogue with consumer protection associations. It's so much so that if these bills are not discussed with these organizations, may create the unconstitutionality of a bill in Congress. And it's a very important element to mention that again confirms the permanent inclusion of associations in the creation of the regulatory body, as well as its follow-up through the generation of early flags. To finish my presentation, I'd like to present some of the programs and projects the network has that again, I believe is a benchmark in consumer protection, not only nationally, but also regionally, since it integrates different authorities and organizations and sectors with the purpose of mitigating exercises that may affect consumer rights, and it's the best example of a preventive and not reactive function. Some of the projects we have is the consumer paths, which are buses traveling around the country to receive consumer complaints by security, as well as other elements specific to the statute. Then we have the consumer houses of goods and services in Bogota nationally. And these are permanent offices for the reception of complaints or the guidance in requirements related to consumer protection. Then we have citizen dialogue that relates to preventive efforts regarding permanent conversation with consumers and producers to inform them about the obligations they have in the various subject matters specific to consumer protection, with a special emphasis on security. Here we ratify the preventive policy in consumer protection. And finally, a project that I love, which is called Consufondo, where we have a bag of money on an annual basis that we submit to the consideration of universities, mayor's office, and consumer associations, so that we can somehow subsidize the development of projects they have related to consumer protection from different perspectives. In this period, we had some developments in artificial intelligence, blockchain, crypto assets, as well as other exercises and activities in the dissemination of rights through different social networks, among others. These are some of the presentations from the network. and how they attend individuals in a personalized way to remind them of the obligations and rights they have. This is an example of one of the projects developed by us, an association, which is the Complaint Family. It's a YouTube series to raise awareness on consumer protection rights, and it's developed by one of the associations in the country. Let me thank you for your time, and hopefully in the future I can describe the activities we're carrying out and to be able to exchange valuable information so that within the participants in this meeting to group the best experiences we've had internationally as well. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Juan Pablo, por
Thank you,
tu
Juan
presentación, por
Pablo, for
compartir
your
esta valiosa
presentation,
información
for sharing
y
this valuable
por comentarnos
information,
acerca de la Red
and
Nacional de
for
Protección al Consumidor, que me
discussing
parece
the
un
national
proyecto
network, which
súper
I believe
interesante
is a
que
very
de alguna
interesting
manera
project that
hace sinergia entre todos los
somehow
actores
makes synergies among all
fundamentales para la
actors that are
protección de las y los
fundamental
consumidores en el marco
for the
de
protection of
la
consumers
CIC.
in
Así
the
que muchas
framework of
gracias. Al
CITES.
final
So
vamos
thank you so
a
much,
hacerte algunas preguntas seguramente
and
desde el
we will
público.
be taking
Pasamos
questions
ahora
from the
con
floor at the
nuestra
end.
tercera y
Let's
última
go to
oradora,
our third
Rosa Morán,
speaker,
en representación
Rosa
del
Moran,
INDECOPI.
that
Te
is
paso la palabra,
representing
Rosa, gracias.
INDECOPI. Rosa, you have the floor. Thank you, Paola. Good afternoon, everyone.
Creo que estás
I'm going
muteada.
to be sharing my screen. Can you hear me? Yes.
Así, bueno, entonces es un problema de mi audio.
Paola, can you hear
Ahora
me?
sí, ahora sí.
Yes,
Gracias.
I can. Thank you. My name's Rosa Moran, and I'm a legal specialist in the National Authority of Consumer Protection in the COPI, and I'm going to talk about the role of the consumers in the Peruvian system of product and service safety. I'm going to share a video which is used to inform citizens on product safety and consumer alerts.
Sí.
In the copy consumption alerts. Maybe it's happened to you once that when buying a product or service, sometime afterward you find a failure that may affect you. In the copy that is interested on the consumer safety has created a system of virtual consumption alert system. And what is the system of hazardous products and services alert? And in the copy detects and issues alerts to advise users on the existence of hazardous or risky products in the Peruvian market. Let me show you how it works. This is the web page. You will find alerts on products and services that report risks that are unforeseen for consumers. To the right, you will find the menu where you have the various options offered by the web. This is the main banner. Here you can see the latest consumption flags indicated by INDECOPI. At the top, you have the search system. You will find all of the alerts by category. You can also use keywords or by clicking as find alerts, and you will see the list of all of the alerts published. You get the result of the search, and when you click on an alert, you will see the product description. In this document, you will find the day of publication, name and brand of product or service, risk description, and more information to download and share. Apart from the alerts, INDECOPI promotes safety campaigns to avoid risks and accidents to consumers. On the main page of consumption alerts, you will also find the option of filing alerts, and it can be easily read and you can access the network from any mobile device. Join with your email to receive information, to receive consumption alerts, updates, and you can share it in different social media and electronic media as well. Check our website and remain informed. To learn more, visit alertasdeconsumo.gov.pe. As you can see, we have an alert portal where we share the alerts that we have. What is this based on? In the Constitution, it guarantees the rights of consumers on goods and services. They can have access to products and services that have issues, and also to take care for the health of and security of the population. Then we have the Code for the Protection and Defense of Consumers. We have multiple articles that seek to protect consumer safety in products and services, and the obligation of adopting measures that are necessary and immediate to reduce risks from products that are in the market. To be able to report risks, we have a decree where it describes the procedures for to be informed and the existence of risks in products and services. So this system in particular is focused on the role in detecting the existence of risks in products and services and informing about actions so that consumer associations that can be up to speed on risk and how we're facing this situation. Our system is fed from different sources of information. We have producers, importers, distributors, final sellers, anyone along the production chain that can share this information. Then we have official international sources. We do constant monitoring of different portals globally to have access to the products that may be traded locally and to replicate them. We have other national competent agencies that is in charge of the surveillance of food safety, pharmaceutical products, and medical products. And finally, another source is consumer associations. And we have consumer associations. So we have multiple channels for them to report. And actually, this is a very simple project where we can be informed. And it talks about consumer associations, databases, official sources. And in the case of consumers, we communicate the existence of any risk through any channel, email, our web portal. And we have a tool to report these situations in the website and further contact information. In this case, the procedure of alert management is based on receiving the information, and we can get them through consumer associations, for example. Then the information is reviewed by product safety team. At least in the case of our case, we need to make sure we have all of the information of why the risk is happening. And so we collect the information and make sure we have all of the information that is needed, or we do a consultation to the providers engaged, the competent sectorial authority if applicable, and then we decide whether to disseminate it or not. When disseminated, it's done through a web page, and we can use all of the available channels within our reach. And we have the alert portal. We have an additional portal, which is consumer protection. And we report anything related to consumer protection. We also use social media. And through the Inter-American system of early warnings or alerts. We provide follow-up and we ask consumers after 1 year of the publication of the alert to make sure 100% of the mitigation measures or risk reduction have been implemented. In other words, the scope of the alert. And we'll see some results in the future. Regarding the dissemination, we have multiple channels. You can hear the links. I will share the presentation so you can click the link later. The Consumer Alert Portal also allows so that anytime the user logs in with their email, they will be able to receive the consumer alert as published and the link for them to check further information. And it also allows to record risks from public entities, consumers, the providers. In the case of consumers, they can have access through the button in the web portal, and then they can have access to a page where you not only access to the form directly, but you can see what you have to report, and there are 2 additional versions in local languages. And so you can have access to the form where you have the information that's requested. And this is information to consider this as a valid report. This is public information, but it's important to report the risk. Then you put the information of the product or service, the risk observed. You can attach documents that you think is necessary or information, and all of this information is analyzed by the product safety team. We have had a large variety of cases. During 2022, we received product alerts. In this case, it's a consumer that called us by phone and said he had received a notification on the existence of a risk. The communication was not very clear, and because the consumer had questions, they contacted us. And the consumer realized that they needed information and reported it. Based on this communication, we immediately asked the provider, the car dealer, and the importer of the cars, and we received information about this specific risk. The alert was published with all of the information from the consumers, and it took longer because the provider took longer to provide the information. When the provider doesn't send the information, this is transferred to the bodies that can carry out the investigation for further sanctions. In this case, it's 179 vehicles involved. This is in terms of consumers. We have different systems that integrate the consumer network. We have a National Council of Consumer Protection, which is citizen representation apart from the states, and associations and trade associations, public entities, Indecopi, ministries, providers, and citizens through the representatives of consumer associations. These consumer associations bring their representatives that are part of this council, in this case, 3 from citizens, to discuss issues with consumer associations. Regarding product safety, we have a WhatsApp group for all consumer associations. At present, we have 98 associations, and we collect information related to consumption. It's a space of agile communication. And it's when people want to receive immediate attention and when a large number of people are affected, so we consult the authorities involved. This is a case where a consumer shared news on pollution. This information had already been received, and we issued communications to the competent authority, and a prompt solution can be given to the consumer and inform the actions we're taking. So in this regard, it provides accountability as well, which is very important to consolidate the consumer protection system. Some challenges we've identified: the communication strategies need to be improved to be in agreement with the reality of all consumers nationally, and we're struggling to be able to take the tools that are necessary for the entire population to have access to this information. We receive thousands of complaints, but we would like to receive millions. There are other competent entities in product safety as well. So it's important that they report on a timely basis their alerts. And we explain the scope of the consumption alerts that we have. In this regard, this year, we've carried out 3 training sessions for public officers and consumers and providers. We did the first one, and it helps us to disseminate the system. The idea is to consolidate, to see what they have to say and contribute to this system. This is my presentation, and thank you for your time. This is my contact information.
Muchas gracias, Rosa. Muy clara,
Thank
excelente y súper gráfico el portal de alertas que tiene el Indecopi, y me parece muy importante también lo que comentás sobre los canales, sobre la implementación de distintos canales de comunicación y de contacto, como por ejemplo el grupo de WhatsApp, y por otro lado también me parece muy novedoso el tema de incluir la información en distintas lenguas, que hace mucho más accesible la información y el contacto con las y los consumidores. Como les decía al principio, tenemos unos 10 minutitos para preguntas y respuestas, así que paso la palabra a quien quiera realizar alguna pregunta a nuestros oradores. Le voy a pedir a la secretaria que me ayude un poco porque no llego a ver si hay alguna mano levantada.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up either right now.
Ahí creo que
But I see
chat, ¿no?
Alejandro would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
Te paso la palabra.
I was just clapping. 3 presentations are very interesting. One of the things that you showed was the need of including associations when drafting laws. And this is something very important and interesting. I think it was in Juan Pablo's presentation. And in Buenos Aires, when we met, I evidently had the idea, the concern of consumer associations is to focus on these systems. Just with the figures that we saw, the workload consumer associations have is very large. The question that, and I would like to listen to your opinions, is if it's advisable to take this to the system of the network and the difficulties that we see. Everyone nationally understands the importance here, but there's a disconnect between what we see nationally and what the network does. So it's just a question.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Aquellos el que quiera empezar a contestar,
So, do we have
puede
anyone
directamente
who
abrir
would
el
like
micrófono.
to answer? You can just open your mic.
Un poco también saber qué les parece o qué consejos darían a aquellos, porque no todos
I'd
a nivel
like
interno
to
tenemos
see
una
what
sección
advice,
implementada en nuestros
because
sistemas de difusión
not
de
all of us
alertas
have a
que permita
section
la
that
participación
can
de las
allow for the
asociaciones y de los consumidores.
participation
Así
of consumer
que
associations and
también nos
consumers.
interesaba
So we're
abrir un poco
also
el debate y dar
interested
estos primeros
in
pasos dentro de la
opening the
red para aquellos que ya
discussion
lo
and
tienen
take the first steps within the
aceitado a
network
nivel interno,
for those that
para
have
poder
oiled
trasladarlo
this
a nivel regional
internally
como estaba
to
planteando acá
take it
Alejandro. Así
regionally,
que
as Alejandro
en breves
mentioned.
minutos conocer las opiniones de
So
los
I'd
tres
like to listen to
colegas
the opinions of the three
sobre esto, sobre
colleagues
las buenas prácticas y sobre los
on
beneficios
best
y los
practices and
consejos
the
como para
benefits
dar
and
esos primeros
advice
pasos a
to
nivel
take
interno y
these
también
first
a nivel
steps
regional en lo
internally
que
and regionally
tiene que ver con el CIAR.
in terms of CIAP. I would like to make a brief introduction regarding that we as superintendency would like to remain at your disposition by sharing the best practices from the negotiations that have existed in our inter-administrative agreements. Although we have the network, every one of the authorities in principle is related by virtue of the law, and somehow there have to be inter-administrative agreements that are permanently negotiated to find out what type of information is shared between the various authorities to understand not only the transmission of information, but in a harmonious way to understand what information we're transferring and what information we need from the authorities. This is a project that has existed for almost 12 years. We've integrated a number of entities without including consumer associations and municipalities that are around 1,200. The exercise has been very fruitful, but it also requires permanent communication. And also, I'd like to mention some of the upcoming exercise for this new administration for consumer protection, where some of the projects include legal design related to legal innovation, and from the democratization of consumer law to share some of the barriers that consumers face when reading some areas that we as authorities understand, but citizens often don't. So the first step is to democratize the language so all citizens can better understand it. And then let me talk to you about another project, which is the implementation of artificial intelligence in consumer protection, so that we can do a much faster exercise in consumer protection. In my office right now, I have 5,000 complaints, and sometimes because of our staff, it's difficult to read them all. And that's why implementing artificial intelligence that can reduce the number of complaints, understanding that consumers are making complaints and the administration is aware about this and the investigation of the cases being presented. I think this will allow to have more effective knowledge for consumers that are informing about these news for the authority. And to finish and related to what Alejandro mentioned, it's good that we learn about the perceptions in terms of consumer protection in Colombia, where the participation of associations is a requisite, a legal requisite for the discussion of bills in Congress. I believe this is an element that I hope further on I can share, because it's an exercise that allows to democratize consumer access from the intervention of these associations that group consumers.
Muchísimas gracias, Juan Pablo, por la respuesta y
Thank
súper
you.
interesante la
Very
información y
interesting
seguramente vamos a
information,
generar esos
and most
espacios para poder
likely we will
compartir
be
un poco
generating
más
these
de
spaces
información
to
y saber
share
más sobre
more
estos proyectos.
information.
No sé si Rosa o Sara quieren agregar algo más.
Sarah or
Okay, I can. Sorry. Thank you, Rosa. Something that Juan Pablo mentioned was the amount of reports that is sitting in his office was 5,000. As you saw, every year we receive around 22,000 reports. Though this is not just from consumers and consumer organizations, but also from maybe hospitals or other members of the public. So I think that in a discussion to implement something similar in our network portal, this is something that we would need to consider. And I guess that is where the AI discussion also comes in. But at CPSC, we have a small staff of less than 11 people that screens every single report and make sure that the specific product coding and hazard coding are entered into the database. And this is something that is very crucial so that the information is used in a way for us to specifically analyze the data to find hazardous patterns of hazardous products that we may not have known previously. So this is a matter of resources for us. Another interesting thought that I had when you asked that question, Alejandro, was this network is comprised of product safety and consumer protection agencies that cover such a large variety of product categories. So in these discussions, something we can consider is the jurisdiction, the scope of what products we would ask to include. So a lot of discussion points came into my head, and I'll stop there because I will give it over to Rosa.
Gracias, Sara. Sobre nuestro trabajo con asociaciones de consumidores, quiero enfocarme un poco desde la pregunta de Alejandro. Nosotros actualmente estamos en un proceso de evaluación a través de nuestra evaluación de impacto regulatorio. ¿Cuáles son las mejoras necesarias a implementar? Y en este caso nos estamos enfocando en el fortalecimiento de asociaciones de consumidores, y una de las demandas pues precisamente es el tema de la internacionalización. Y considero que si a través de la red es posible generar espacios de encuentro con asociaciones de consumidores de otros países o espacios donde puedan discutir temas relacionados a seguridad de productos, esto sería sumamente importante porque además de brindarles escenarios importantes donde discutir cuáles son los retos a los que se enfrentan, cuáles son las oportunidades de trabajo que pueden ellos realizar, de modo que se empoderen como consumidores, pues sería importante poder generar así un espacio, y de hecho proyectos de este tipo serían bien recibidos en Indicopy, ¿no? Entonces creo que allí, más que un trabajo ya realizado, vemos nosotros como una buena oportunidad de trabajo, y en ese marco agradezco pues la pregunta que nos ha realizado Alejandro. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Sara, y muchas gracias, Rosa. Estamos con muy poco tiempo, así que le voy a pasar la palabra a Katia, que levantó la mano para la última pregunta de la reunión.
Gracias,
Es
buenas
un tema
tardes.
que da para más, pero bueno, es un buen
Sí, en
comienzo.
realidad, muchas gracias, Paula. Y bueno, mucho gusto de saludarlos a todos. Yo en realidad es un comentario muy breve lo que quiero hacer, y es en relación con estos esfuerzos que se están realizando desde la Red de Consumo y Seguro y Salud, que me parecen sumamente valiosos para compartir experiencias de los demás países. Evidentemente, o sea, los 3 ejemplos que participaron hoy son ejemplos muy robustos. No todos los países tenemos esa infraestructura de alertas tan coordinada como la que hoy vimos, que yo creo que eso es el punto número 1, que me parece que es sumamente importante. Como punto número 2, saber que nosotros como Red de Consumo, Seguro y Salud, pues tenemos una competencia y una normativa que tenemos ahí, y que tenemos, no todos los productos inseguros o peligrosos se pueden subir al sistema, que ese es otro aspecto que es importante. Y tercero, o sea, me parece, y lo dije también en Argentina cuando estuvimos por allá reunidos, en su momento, es decir, el rol que juegan las asociaciones o las agencias de protección al consumidor es un rol que es sumamente importante y determinante, en el sentido de que tiene que tamizar esa información, tiene que revisar esa información para, como bien ahora Sara lo dijo, no todo se puede subir, no todo se puede reportar, ¿verdad? Sino que hay que cumplir con una serie de requisitos que desde esa perspectiva le da seguridad jurídica y veracidad a lo que hacemos como agencias de protección al consumidor. Me parece muy importante, digamos, el tema que acaba de señalar Rosa y que acá señaló Alejandro, Juan Pablo y Sara, en el sentido de capacitar a las asociaciones de consumidores sobre lo que son retiros de productos de mercado, cómo se hacen en cada uno de los países de nosotros. Eso me parece importante, y también tener una capacitación como esta para ellos, para que vean cómo funciona en otros países y cuál sería, digamos, el rol que pudieran ellos jugar en todo este mundo de la protección de los consumidores, o de ofrecerle productos seguros a los consumidores. Esa era mi intervención y muchísimas gracias. De verdad que me parece que la actividad del día de hoy ha sido muy provechosa.
Muchas gracias, Katia, por tus comentarios. Y sí, creo que un paso a seguir podría ser este de introducir a las asociaciones de consumidores a este mundo de las alertas, y poder generar también desde la red espacios para capacitarlos, porque mismo estos sistemas no son nada si no hay alguien que los nutre de información. Entonces creo que la difusión acerca de las alertas, acerca de los procesos de recalls internos, y también sobre la existencia del CIAR y la posibilidad de cargar a futuro, si es posible, la información, o mismo de notificarse sobre las alertas, es sumamente importante. Estamos ya pasados en el horario. Quería agradecer a nuestros oradores, a Sara, a Rosa y a Juan Pablo, por sus presentaciones, por compartir esta información. Agradecerle a la Secretaría Técnica por el apoyo, a la intérprete también que nos acompaña hoy, y también quería agradecerles a todos y a todas ustedes por haberse conectado, en especial a aquellas autoridades que no son parte de la red, y aprovecho para invitarlos a que se sumen. Así que, bueno, eso es todo. Les agradezco mucho
Muchas
la conexión.
gracias.
Que
Muchas
tengan buenas
gracias, Paula, que
tardes.
estés bien.
Gracias, que esté muy bien.